Veliky Novgorod, also known as Novgorod the Great or Novgorod Veliky, or just Novgorod, is one of the most important historic cities in Russia, which serves as the administrative center of Novgorod Oblast. It is situated on the M10 federal highway connecting Moscow and St. Petersburg. The city lies along the Volkhov River just downstream from its outflow from Lake Ilmen. UNESCO recognized Novgorod as a World Heritage Site in 1992. Population 218,717, 216,856, 229,126. At its peak during the 14th century, the city was the capital of Novgorod Republic and one of Europe's largest cities. History. Early developments. The Sophia First Chronicle makes initial mention of it in 859, while the Novgorod First Chronicle first mentions it in 862, when it was purportedly already a major Baltic Byzantium station on the trade route from the Varangians to the Greeks. The Charter of Veliky Novgorod recognizes 859 as the year when the city was first mentioned. Archaeological excavations in the middle to late 20th century, however, have found cultural layers dating back only to the late 10th century, the time of the Christianization of Rus, and a century after it was allegedly founded, suggesting that the chronicle entries mentioning Novgorod in the 850s or 860s are later interpolations. Archaeological dating is fairly easy and accurate to within 15 to 25 years, as the streets were paved with wood, and most of the houses made of wood, allowing tree ring dating. The Varangian name of the city, Holmgard, is mentioned in Norse sagas as existing at a yet earlier stage, but in this case historical facts are difficult to untangle from legend. Originally, Holmgard referred only to the stronghold southeast of the present-day city, Rurikovo Gorodisha. Archaeological data suggests that the Gorodisha, the residence of the Nyaz, dates from the mid-9th century, whereas the town itself dates only from the end of the 10th century, hence the name Novgorod, New City, from Old Church Slavonic, and, although German and Scandinavian historiography suggests the Old Norse term Nygarth or the Old High German term Naugard, first mention of this Nordic or Germanic etymology to the name of the city of Novgorod occurs in the 10th century policy manual to Administranda Imperia by Byzantine Emperor Konstantin VII, slightly predating the chronology of the legend of Rurik. An earlier record for the Scandinavian settlement of the region is found in the Anne Albertiniani, where a Rus delegation is mentioned as having visited Constantinople in 838 and, intending to return to the Rus Khaganate via the Baltic Sea, were questioned by Frankish Emperor Louis the Pious at Ingelheim am Rhine, where they said that although their origin was Swedish, they had settled in northern Rus under a leader who they designated as Chakonis, princely state within Kievan Rus. In 882, Rurik's successor, Oleg of Novgorod, conquered Kiev and founded the state of Kievan Rus. Novgorod's size as well as its political, economic, and cultural influence made it the second most important city in Kievan Rus. According to a custom, the elder son and heir of the ruling Kievan monarch was sent to rule Novgorod even as a minor. When the ruling monarch had no such son, Novgorod was governed by posádniks, such as the legendary Gostomysl, Dobrynya, Konstantin, and Ostromir. Of all the princes, Novgorodians most cherished the memory of Yaroslav the Wise, who sat as Prince of Novgorod from 1010 to 1019, while his father, Vladimir the Great, was a prince in Kiev. Yaroslav promulgated the first written code of laws among the Eastern Slavs. Slavs and is said to have granted the city a number of freedoms or privileges, which they often referred to in later centuries as precedents in the relations with other princes. His son, Vladimir, sponsored construction of the Great Street, Sophia Cathedral, more accurately translated as the Cathedral of Holy Wisdom, which stands to this day. Early foreign ties. In Norse sagas the city is mentioned as the capital of Gardarike. Four Viking kings, Olaf I of Norway, Olaf II of Norway, Magnus I of Norway, and Harald Hardrada, sought refuge in Novgorod from enemies at home. No more than a few decades after the 1030 death and subsequent canonization of Olaf II of Norway, the city's community had erected in his memory St. Olaf's Church in Novgorod. The town of Visby in Gotland functioned as the leading trading center in the Baltic before the Hansa League. At Novgorod in 1080, Visby merchants established a trading post which they named Gartagard. Later, in the first half of the 13th century, merchants from northern Germany also established their own trading station in Novgorod, known as Peterhof. At about the same time, in 1229, German merchants at Novgorod were granted certain privileges, which made the position more secure. Novgorod Republic in 1136, the Novgorodians dismissed the Prince Vsevolodym Mstislavich. The year is seen as the traditional beginning of the Novgorod Republic. The city was able to invite and dismiss a number of princes over the next 2 centuries, but the princely office was never abolished, and powerful princes, such as Alexander Nevsky, could assert their will in the city regardless of what Novgorodians said. The city-state controlled most of Europe's northeast, from lands east of today's Estonia to the Ural Mountains, making it one of the largest states in medieval Europe. Although much of the territory north and east of Lakes Ladoga and Onega was sparsely populated and never organized politically, one of the most important local figures in Novgorod was the Posádnik, or mayor, an official elected by the public assembly from among the city's boyarstvo, or aristocracy. The Tysyatsky, or thousandman, originally the head of the town militia but later a commercial and judicial official, was also elected by the Vesh. Another important local official was the Archbishop of Novgorod, who shared power with the boyars. Archbishops were elected by the Vesha by the drawing of lots, and after their election, were sent to the Metropolitan for consecration. While a basic outline of the various officials and the Vesh can be drawn up, the city-state's exact political constitution remains unknown. The boyars and the archbishop ruled the city together, although where one official's power ended and another's began is uncertain. The prince, although his power was reduced from around the middle of the 12th century, was represented by his namestnik, or lieutenant, and still played important roles as a military commander, legislator and jurist. The exact composition of the Vesh, too, is uncertain, with some historians, such as Vasily Klyachevsky, claiming it was democratic in nature, while later scholars, such as Marxists Valentin Ionin and Alexander Koroshev, see it as a sham democracy, controlled by the ruling elite. In the 13th century, Novgorod, while not a member of the Hanseatic League, was the easternmost contour, or entrepot, of the League, being the source of enormous quantities of luxury and non-luxury furs. Throughout the Middle Ages, the city thrived culturally. A large number of birch bark letters have been unearthed in excavations, perhaps suggesting widespread literacy, although this is uncertain. It was in Novgorod that the Novgorod Codex, the oldest Slavic book written north of Macedonia, and the oldest inscription in a Finnic language were unearthed. Some of the most ancient Russian chronicles were written in the scriptorium of the archbishops, who also promoted iconography and patronized church construction. The Novgorod merchant Sadko became a popular hero of Russian folklore. Novgorod was never conquered by the Mongols during the Mongol invasion of Rus. The Mongol army turned back about 200 kilometers from the city, not because of the city's strength, but probably because the Mongol commanders did not want to get bogged down in the marshlands surrounding the city. However, the Grand Princes of Moscow, who acted as tax collectors for the Khans of the Golden Horde, did collect tribute in Novgorod, most notably Yuri Danilovich and his brother Ivan Kalita. In 1259, hordes, tax collectors and census takers arrived in the city, leading to political disturbances and forcing Alexander Nevsky to punish a number of town officials for defying him as Grand Prince of Vladimir and his Mongol overlords. In the 14th century, raids by Novgorod pirates, or ushkuiniki, sowed fear as far as Kazan and Astrakhan, assisting Novgorod in wars with the Grand Duchy of Moscow. During the era of Old Rus state, Novgorod was a trade hub at the northern end of both the Volga trade route and the route from the Varangians to the Greeks along the Dnieper river system. A vast array of goods were transported along these routes and exchanged with local Novgorod merchants and other traders. The farmers of Gotland retained the Santola trading house well into the 12th century. Later German merchantmen also established trading houses in Novgorod. Scandinavian royalty would intermarry with Russian princes and princesses. After the Great Schism, Novgorod struggled from the beginning of the 13th century against Swedish, Danish, and German crusaders. During the Swedish Novgorodian Wars, the Swedes invaded lands where some of the population had earlier paid tribute to Novgorod. The Germans had been trying to conquer the Baltic region since the late 12th century. Novgorod went to war 26 times with Sweden and 11 times with the Livonian Brothers of the Sword. The German knights, along with Danish and Swedish feudal lords, launched a series of uncoordinated attacks in 1240 to 1242. Novgorodian sources mention that a Swedish army was defeated in the Battle of the Neva in 1240. The Baltic German campaigns ended in failure after the battle on the ice in 1242. After the foundation of the castle of Vyborg in 1293, the Swedes gained a foothold in Karelia. On August 12, 1323, Sweden and Novgorod signed the Treaty of Noteborg, regulating the border for the first time. Expansion of Muscovy. The city's downfall occurred partially as a result of its inability to feed its large population, making it dependent on the Vladimir Suzdal region for grain. The main cities in the area, Moscow and Tver, used this dependence to gain control over Novgorod. Eventually, Ivan III forcibly annexed the city to the Grand Duchy of Moscow in 1478. The Veche was dissolved and a significant part of Novgorod's population was either killed or deported. The Hanseatic League contour was closed in 1494 and the goods stored there were seized by Muscovite forces. At the time of annexation, Novgorod became the third largest city under Muscovy and remained so until the famine of the 1560s and the massacre of Novgorod in 1570. In the massacre, Ivan the Terrible sacked the city, slaughtered thousands of its inhabitants, and deported the city's merchant elite and nobility to Moscow, Yaroslavl and elsewhere. The last decade of the 16th century was a comparatively favorable period for the city as Boris Godunov restored trade privileges and raised the status of Novgorod bishop. The German trading post was re-established in 1603. During the time of troubles, Novgorodians submitted to Swedish troops led by Jacob de la Gardie in the summer of 1611. The city was restituted to Muscovy, a brief 6 years later, by the Treaty of Stolbovo, and only regained a measure of its former prosperity towards the end of the century, when such ambitious buildings as the Cathedral of the Sign and the Vyazhishi Monastery were constructed. The most famous of Muscovite patriarchs, Nikon, was active in Novgorod between 1648 and 1652. The Novgorod land became one of the Old Believers' strongholds after the schism. In 1727, Novgorod was made the administrative center of Novgorod Governorate of the Russian Empire, which was detached from St. Petersburg Governorate. This administrative division existed until 1927. Between 1927 and 1944, the city was a part of Novgorod Oblast, and then became the administrative center of the newly formed Novgorod Oblast. Modern era. On August 15, 1941, during World War II, the city was occupied by the German army. Its historic monuments were systematically annihilated. The Red Army liberated the city on January 19, 1944. Out of 2,536 stone buildings, fewer than 40 remained standing. After the war, thanks to plans laid down by Alexei Shosev, the central part was gradually restored. In 1992, the chief monuments of the city and the surrounding area were declared to be World Heritage Sites. Historic monuments of Novgorod and surroundings. In 1999, the city was officially renamed Veliky Novgorod, thus partly reverting to its medieval title, Lord Novgorod the Great. This reduced the temptation to confuse Veliky Novgorod with Nizhny Novgorod, a larger city the other side of Moscow which, between 1932 and 1990, had been renamed Gorky in honor of Maxim Gorky. Administrative and municipal status. Veliky Novgorod is the administrative center of the oblast and, within the framework of administrative divisions, it also serves as the administrative center of Novgorodsky district, even though it is not a part of it. As an administrative division, it is incorporated separately as the city of oblast. Significance of Veliky Novgorod, an administrative unit with status equal to that of the districts. As a municipal division, the city of Oblast. Significance of Veliky Novgorod is incorporated as Veliky Novgorod urban okrug. Sites. The city is known for the variety and age of its medieval monuments. The foremost among these is the St. Sophia Cathedral, built between 1045 and 1050 under the patronage of Vladimir Yaroslavich, the son of Yaroslav the Wise. It is one of the best preserved churches from the 11th century. It's also probably the oldest structure still in use in Russia and the first one to represent original features of Russian architecture. Its frescoes were painted in the 12th century, originally on the orders of Bishop Nikita, and renovated several times over the centuries. Most recently in the 19th century, the cathedral features famous bronze gates, which now hang in the west entrance. Allegedly made in Magdeburg in 1156 and reportedly snatched by Novgorodians from the Swedish town of Sigtuna in 1187. More recent scholarship has determined that the gates were most likely purchased in the mid-15th century, apparently at the behest of Archbishop Euphamius II, a lover of Western art and architectural styles. The Novgorod Kremlin, traditionally known as the Ditonets, also contains the oldest palace in Russia, which served as the main meeting hall of the archbishops, the oldest Russian bell tower, and the oldest Russian clock tower. The palace of facets, the bell tower, and the clock tower were originally built on the orders of Archbishop Euphamius II, although the clock tower collapsed in the 17th century and had to be rebuilt, and much of the palace of Euphamius II is no longer standing. Among later structures, the most remarkable are a royal palace and a bronze monument to the millennium of Russia, representing the most important figures from the country's history. Outside the Kremlin walls, there are three large churches constructed during the reign of Mstislav the Great. St. Nicholas Cathedral, containing frescoes of Mstislav's family, graces Yaroslav's court. The Yureyev Monastery contains a tall, three-domed cathedral from 1119. A similar three-domed cathedral, probably designed by the same masters, stands in the Antonyev Monastery, built on the orders of Antony, the founder of that monastery. There are now some 50 medieval and early modern churches scattered throughout the city and its surrounding areas. Some of them were blown up by the Nazis and subsequently restored. The most ancient pattern is represented by those dedicated to Saints Pyotr and Pavel, to Annunciation, to Assumption, and to Saint Paraskeva Pyatnitsa. The greatest masterpiece of early Novgorod architecture is the Saviour Church at Neroditsa. In the 13th century, tiny churches of the three-paddle design were in vogue. These are represented by a small chapel at the Perrin Monastery and St. Nicholas on the Lipny Islet. The next century saw the development of two original church designs, one of them culminating in St. Theodore's Church, and another one leading to the Saviour Church on Ilina Street. The Saviour Church in Kovalevo was originally frescoed by Serbian masters, but the church was destroyed during the war. While the church has since been rebuilt, the frescoes have not been restored. During the last century of the Republican government, some new churches were consecrated to Saints Peter and Paul, to Christ's Nativity, to St. John the Apostles, to the 12 Apostles, to St. Demetrius, to St. Simeon, and other saints. Generally, they are not thought to be as innovative as the churches from the previous period. Several shrines from the 12th century were demolished brick by brick and then reconstructed exactly as they used to be. Several of them in the mid-15th century, again under Archbishop Yevfemy II, perhaps one of the greatest patrons of architecture in medieval Novgorod. Novgorod's conquest by Ivan III in 1478 decisively changed the character of local architecture. Large commissions were thenceforth executed by Muscovite masters and patterned after cathedrals of Moscow Kremlin, e.g., the Saviour Cathedral of Khutan Monastery, the Cathedral of the Mother of God of the Sign, the St. Nicholas Cathedral of Vyazhizhi Monastery. Nevertheless, the styles of some parochial churches were still in keeping with local traditions, e.g., the churches of myrrh-bearing women and of Saints Boris and Gleb, in Svitoslavlitsy, along the Volkhov River, and the Mayashino Lake, close to the Yureyev Monastery. A museum of wooden architecture was established in 1964. Over 20 wooden buildings dating from the 14th to the 19th century were transported, from all around the Novgorod region. Transportation. Intercity transport. Novgorod has connections to Moscow and St. Petersburg by the Federal Highway M10. There are public buses to St. Petersburg and other destinations. The city has direct railway passenger connections with Moscow, St. Petersburg, Minsk and Murmansk. The city's airports Yureva and Khrashevitsy do not serve any regular flights since the middle 1990s. The nearest international airport is St. Petersburg's Pulkovo, some 180 kilometers north of the city. Local transportation. Local transportation consists of a network of buses and trolleybuses. The trolleybus network, which currently consists of 5 routes, started operating in 1995 and is the first trolley system opened in Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union. Honors. A minor planet, 3799 Novgorod, discovered by the Soviet astronomer Nikolai Stepanovich Chernik in 1979, is named after the city. Twin towns, sister cities, and partner towns. Veliky Novgorod is twinned with